Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's very special Modern Sales Pros Masterclass on team alignment, sponsored by the team at Proposify. We've got a lot to cover here today. We got a lot of great questions that came in during registration, and there's a ton to explore on this topic. So in lieu of having kind of a fun little opening, we're actually going to jump right into our content story for the day. And to make sure that everybody knows what we've got going on, we're going to be talking about team alignment, your organization's missing ingredient. And we have Conor Cox, CRO at Proposify on. He's going to introduce himself in a second, but we're going to be talking through what they've done at Proposify around the pod model, which is super, super interesting and it's an interesting topic. Today's session is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are individuals that are in sales or revenue operations, sales management, sales enablement, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own, explore new concepts they may not be familiar with, or see around corners that they don't even know are coming. We do that through partnering with great brands like Proposify to bring together content programs and speakers like Conor, like what we have here today talking about the pod model. We have a very robust online discussion board. And in the future, once it's safe, we're going to get back to doing in-person event programs where you can meet some new people and learn some stuff. If you enjoy today's session, we also have in July a 3-day multi-event choose your own adventure, what we call a virtual summit, where we're fully going to explore the idea of organizations and go-to-market being designed customer in as opposed to function out. Affectionately called the funnel is dead. HubSpot calls it the flywheel. I think Gartner or Forrester call it the bow tie, but really thinking beyond just that linear process that we go through to bring revenue on board. Conor will actually be joining us as a speaker for that. So you get to see him. If you like what you hear today, you get to see him again in a month or so. But as I mentioned, today would not be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Proposify. I'll hand it off to Conor to say a few words about Proposify. Conor.
Awesome, thanks. So here from Proposify. Proposify is the proposal software that helps you own the close. So we are all about giving sales teams, really any revenue team, control and visibility into the closing stage of their sales cycle. So, we're focused on a couple spokes in the flywheel or the middle of that bow tie, but that is what we're here to do. We also just launched a Proposify free plan. So any sales rep from any company is able to leverage Proposify software, no charge, no limit. So definitely check that out if you're interested.
It's pretty awesome stuff. And I think the stat that we talked about last time was the PDF came out in 1996.
It's been a long time, yeah.
Yeah, it's been like 20. It's old enough to drink. Let's put it that way. So Proposify puts a fresh spin on that, and it's awesome team as well, as you'll hear from Conor today. But with that, Conor, well, let's have you introduce yourself a little bit, because you have actually a little bit of a unique background for a CRO.
Yeah, so I am the CRO Proposify. My team has taken to calling me the company Crow, but I took a kind of atypical path, I guess, into that. So started kind of building customer success teams here locally in Halifax. Joined Proposify about 2.5 years ago to build out their CS team. About 1.5 years in, was promoted to Chief Customer Officer, and then at the end of Q1 this year, I got promoted to Chief Revenue Officer. So that's been my path through the org and the path to the seat I'm in now.
Awesome. And then just a few housekeeping notes for the folks that are here today. We've got a lot to cover. We know this is a new concept, so please do ask any questions that you have. We may not be able to get to all of them, but please do use the question and answer panel. That will help us follow up with you afterwards if there's something that we want to explore a little bit deeper. And finally, please know that the recording will be made available. Here's about 24 hours afterwards. It'll be up on the Modern Sales Pros YouTube channel. We'll also host a post-event page on modernsaleshq.com/previous events. So you can see all the key takeaways. And if you want to relive it, you can watch it a bunch of times there. But with that, Conor, we did it. That was record time for introductions. You ready?
Yeah, ready to go.
I love it. I love it. So today, here's what we're going to talk about, folks. We're going to talk first about what the heck we mean when we say pod structure. We'll talk then about closing the gap between sales, CS, and the supporting functions. We'll then talk about this idea of customers, more custom experience, or more customer in as opposed to function out experience via the team-based approach. And then finally, we'll talk about how this actually created a unique opportunity for professional services to help account expansion. Before we jump into all of this, one thing that's going to be important, Connor, can you just level set a little bit about Proposify's, average sale price, kind of the tail of the tape, so that way our audience can start to say, okay, cool, this is where Proposify sits. This is how they're doing things.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll add some context because this is definitely not a rip and replace for everyone. So Proposify, we are we're, like I said, a proposal software solution that serves SMBs around the world. So we've got around 10,000 customers right now that use the platform. We do have a small but mighty sales team as well. They're typically bringing in deals around $10,000 ACV. So that's kind of, I guess, the stage. What kind of led us to this point of having pods really started, I would say, 2 years ago when I took over our support team. So we started there. We really needed a better way to align our support resources with our CSMs. We said, hey, why don't we pair people together? That was really the start of this pod model. Fast forward a few months, we're really not seeing what we wanted to from CSM to AE handoffs. That was a little light bulb for us. Said, hey, maybe we can create some continuity by matching CSMs and AEs to create, more consistency there. The next step in the journey was we, saw a lot of disqualified leads. We bring in a ton of traffic. We're inbound driven business, and we were disqualifying a ton of leads and we weren't doing much with them. So we started to put support reps on them and they started closing a ton of business, which really led us to this next step, which was, hey, maybe we can look at, combining our sales and our customer team into one, calling it a revenue team, and then taking the success that we had with the pod model, really on the expansion and the renewal side, expand that to include new business. And that is really kind of how we've landed at the point that we are today.
Awesome. No, I think that's super, super valuable context. But this is it. This was, I think, the most common registration. What is the pod structure? What is it? Can you walk us through this? I think this is super, super, super important for the audience.
For sure. And yeah, if there's any designers, I apologize for this, whatever you'd call it, dog's breakfast. But this is the graphic that I put together to really help the new pods understand the logistics of how they were going to work together. So if we zoom out on this, there's 6 roles in our typical pod. So we have a business development rep, your standard, looking at inbound leads, maybe doing a little bit of prospecting, qualification for our account executives. They're sort of our initial decision diamonds. So when we tested out our transactional role, we found that it was really, simple buyers. So people that knew what they wanted, didn't need to go through a full sales process, not buying by committee, what we would call a transactional or a simple deal. So that top arrow that points from the BDR, that was what used to be disqualified leads for us. So that's kind of the first step. But I guess the easiest way to describe this is that there are some partnerships in here that make a ton of sense. So our BDRs and our AEs are paired together. Every account executive has a BDR that they always work with. We do that because it's the best way to kind of transfer knowledge and get better, experiment, learn. So that's that first arrow. I'm trying to point with my mouse, but it's probably not going to work. Next piece is the AE and the CSM connection. So we've also paired account executives and CSMs, doing that for a lot of different reasons. You talk about verticals or segmenting by territory, segmenting by deal size. That's that piece there. When you look at the top of this graphic, you'll see our growth rep. That's our transactional sales rep. So again, working on simple deals, close our average sales cycle for them is 6.8 days. So it's quite a quick and snappy process. And then the piece that sits after them is what we call a workflow specialist. So we've essentially taken a light touch CSM model, which you see at the bottom, which is our AE and CSM pairing. And we've gone to what we kind of call internally an ultralight model, which would be our growth rep and our workflow specialist. So that's how opportunities move through the pod. You'll see those dashed arrows. Those really represent things that as a deal moves along or moves through its life cycle, we learn more. So sometimes a simple deal that came in the door that was a single or a small sales team expands. And that's one of the really great things about the pod is that while these opportunities are moving through and there's work happening and discussions going on, it's happening amongst a team. It's not happening, with one person in one inbox. These are conversations that run through shared Slack channels. These are, opportunities that get talked about on a weekly basis at PodSyncs. And it's really helped us sort of put the customer at the center of the sales process and instead of trying to run customers through our sales process. So this model has really allowed us to be a lot more flexible. Not everyone needs the same thing from a managed trial. Not everyone needs the same thing from a demo. And with the pod model, it's really allowed our sellers, i.e. our AEs and our growth reps, to say, hey, working with the customer, they're really technical. They care a ton about our integrations. Well, that, support system essentially is going to be a technical support rep that needs to jump in and be the sales engineer on that call. Whereas sometimes our account executives need customer referrals. They'll go into workflow specialists to find accounts that have a similar workflow today in the app and bring those people to the calls to talk about how they rolled that out. So this is kind of the visual that we use to like try and communicate that to the team. Do realize there's a lot going on in it, but this is essentially how we've tied all of those different roles together. And then you can kind of get a sense too of like what everyone is focused on. So our workflow specialists care a ton about white space. They're trying to train and enable accounts that have a lot of expansion potential so that our growth reps can come in and sell them on higher tiered plans, feature sets, things that they might not have. And by the same kind of, I guess, other side of the same coin would be our CSMs working on our large ACV accounts. And when they're identifying large expansion opportunities with new logos and new markets, they know how their AE works and they know how to tee it up for them. So that's really been the biggest win for us in all of this, is that, we went remote. It became incredibly hard to keep that team dynamic and that fun that we had in our office. This has honestly been another amazing way to create relationships inside the org and keep people connected and kind of keep the experimentation and the fun going. So that is a lot. I'll pause there and maybe there's a question or some clarification needed. Yeah.
Yeah, folks, please do use the Q&A panel. Connor just dropped some serious knowledge here. I'm going to walk through this just to make sure that I've got it, because this is a lot. So somebody comes in, they're chatting. The BDR is kind of the first point of triage.
Yep.
If it feels like it's going to be a big deal, it goes on one path.
Yep.
If it feels like it's going to be maybe a smaller deal, right, or big deals, I'm just going to annotate this here. So our little deals, right, more transactional, we're going up.
Exactly.
Are more complex, right? This is more of the maybe double ACV or whatever it is, sales kind of going down.
Exactly.
From here, right, then the flow goes, my transactional deal then goes to, come on, annotation. Man, I thought I knew how to use Zoom by now.
Oh, it doesn't cooperate all the time.
There we go. Well, it blocks your head out when I go to annotate here. So on my transactional deal flow, I'm going from there. Growth reps kind of engaging with me. We're moving folks along the process here. It gets closed to one. It goes to something is this workflow specialist? This is
exactly
like a junior CSM, or is this somebody that's more technical? Like, what's the skill set difference between those two?
You nailed it. So there's just so many layers in this onion. That is what we would call a junior CSM. So I know we're going to talk about services later, but depending on the path that these folks take, there's different services that they almost always buy. So this has been another way for us to turn like a historical cost center in our support team into a revenue engine. So we've now got, instead of having maybe 2 or 3 individuals on the team that deliver services, we've got 20 different people now that are delivering services. So that path is exactly right. So, and we're even moving past the BDR model and automating a lot of this. We've just rolled out a new lead matrix as well. But yeah, exactly. If you're a simple deal, again, we're working with SMBs. So these will be the owners of the business that have researched again, I don't want to have to go through a discovery call, a demo, an implementation review. If I'm the owner of my business and I've spent 2 weeks researching tools and I've picked you, I want to get in there and start working. So that path is started out as the simple small deal. Now it's just the people that want to move quickly. We have our transactional reps closing the exact same size deals now as our AE, and they're doing it with people that just want to move quickly. So that's been the biggest win for us, I would say, from this, is that those historical deals that looked small at the beginning and we would typically disqualify are now making it through, closing at a good clip, and we're also tacking a lot of services onto them. So it's been a huge win.
Interesting questions coming in live here, Connor. And I want to throw through 2 of these right at you. These aren't easy ones. So in this case right here, right, when the growth rep is working something, it turns out it's a complex deal.
Yeah.
And it gets handed off to the AE. How do you kind of think about structuring quotas and compensation in this world, but also in that scenario where we're moving a deal from one rep to another because it's met some threshold?
Yeah, no, that's totally fair question. So what we've done with this, honestly, is that we've taken a very simple approach to comp. So for our growth reps, we're comping them 10% of any ARR that they add and 10% of any services. And we're honestly doing the same thing for our account executives because of the way that we're a volume-based business here. So that's how we're comping folks. Our BDRs are comped on sales qualified opportunities. So for them, that's exactly the kind of learning that we want to have happen within the pod. Because if that deal goes from a BDR and they say, oh, it's no good, and they kick to the growth rep, and that growth rep refers it down to the account executive, the BDR wants to know what they missed, and the growth rep's going to be able to tell them. And that's one of those learning loops that the pods have helped. So again, you need good people to make this work, and we're super fortunate to have a really kind of team and collaboratively focused group. But that's how that process runs today.
It's interesting. I think that's always such an interesting one when you talk about maybe non-traditional organization structures. We talked about this a little bit in annotation, trying to dismiss questions here. We chatted about this a little bit when you and I were talking, right? My background being more enterprise, you're running a little bit more of a transactional model here. Question coming in live around like, how would you think about this differently if this was an enterprise model or maybe more of global target accounts and all that? How do you think about that? Does this still make sense, or is it maybe more of just the pairs instead of pods like we had talked about?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, without knowing much about the business, I would say that it would make more sense to start small. So it's like the eat the elephant one bite at a time idea. And that's how we arrived at this too. Like this wasn't what you see today, was iterated on over probably 18 months to arrive at the point that we're at now, and it's still changing. So I would say from an enterprise standpoint, longer sales cycles, more relationship building. We've seen a ton of, even in our what we would deem sort of our mid-market deals, we've seen a ton of value in bringing more people into the sales cycle. So Gong put out a really fun stat, sales, close rates increased by 458% when you add another person from your team to the mix. So from that standpoint, if I was looking at this at an enterprise company and you've got your sales reps, I would look at the type of role that they most typically talk to or need support from. And I'd look at creating a partnership there just to see how that performs against the average, round robin. It's random. I don't know who I'm going to be working with on this because a computer is going to decide. That's how we looked at it, was let's pair a CSM and an AE together and see if that improves our handoffs. What are they going to do differently? Well, what they're going to do differently is start using Vidyard and doing video handoffs for every calls. That's now how we do every single handoff. So I would certainly start small, look at the roles that are most leaned on most often on the sales side of things, and start there. Alternatively, you could also look at matching up your pre and post sales leaders like the AE and the CSM and starting from that point. Within our pods, our AEs and CSMs are kind of the leaders within the pod. So that might be another option for you. It would really be where the most friction is it we need to win more business, or our handoffs from our sales to our CS team aren't as strong as we need them to be, and kind of key in there and figure out what partnership would make sense to start with.
And I think the other part too is, as Conor mentioned, Proposify took a data-driven approach to look at this. They looked at the friction, they looked at the gaps, they looked at the opportunities that they have. It might not work for your business. This isn't Karen. This isn't like some great thing that's going to solve all of your sales problems. It's just another approach. The other thing that I would add to, in bigger organizations, especially enterprise selling, this starts to happen a little bit organically just through either segmentation or geography design. When you think of a longer sales cycle, you've got sales engineers, specialists that you're bringing on and tagging into deals. Over time, there's an affinity that develops there. So this may have happened a little bit organically, especially as you think of sales engineer to sales or the CS organization. Those alignments sometimes end up looking very similar, but it more happens to you, as opposed to what Conor's saying is like, you can be deliberate about how you design that and test some hypotheses here.
Exactly.
And one more question. I think this is just a great question about PDRs and qualification. One of the key decision points, right? Somebody who wants to move fast, right? You move them into one bucket versus somebody who's going to need a little bit more. How are you training your BDRs, and what are some of the questions that they're asking to figure out like move fast versus going to be a little bit more complex?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think for us, one of the things that we're looking at obviously is like who the person is and where they sit in their org. So if people that are more owners and more in power positions within companies to make decisions, like that's one of the pieces here. Decision timeline's another good one too. Like if you've got someone that wants to move, let's say, we need this solution in the next week or in the next couple of weeks, we're not going to have time to run you through a 5-call, 6-hour invested sales cycle. So we get very specific about timelines and how acute the pains are that the prospects have when they come in the door. So that's where I would say we lean right now. We also use a lot of firmographic data. Like we enrich everything that comes through. Anything under a certain threshold, we're going to send the transactional route anyways. So it's a combo of the lead matrix with the firmographic info. Vidyard is asking for, again, power to decide, speed of implementation, how quickly do we want to move? And then this is honestly another area where we're learning and iterating probably on a weekly basis right now too. Our whole thing is we want to get you to the right person as quickly as possible. So one of the things that we learned very early on when we implemented this is we had a lot of folks that they would come to our site, they'd request a demo. It would be about 2 weeks until they actually got that demo. They'd need to get a discovery call. They would need to,
No.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So that was one of the things that, again, when I came in and started looking at it, I was like, how do we turn that into the same day? Like, what do we need to do to give you a demo immediately? We're not there yet, but we're down to about like 24, 48 hours, depending if it's at the end of the week or not. But yeah, that's something we're learning. But again, people that they'll be explicit with you if they want to move quickly. And if they have the decision power to do so and their firmographic matches what we've seen so far, again, going back to data driven, this is where our models will be helpful too. That's what we're doing right now.
I think, and just for context on this is a primarily inbound driven business. Is that right? Or is there some outbound component? Because that's an important characteristic here, right? You've got a volume of inbound leads you're sussing through. You're not like cold calling and trying to get people fired up, right?
Exactly. So right now, I would say 80% of our opportunities that go to our account executives come through inbound. The other 20% or so are outbound driven. One of the things that we are starting to see a lot more of is referrals from CSMs and current customers. This has certainly cranked the number of like we call CSQL, so CS qualified leads that come through the door. So that's been another just like unanticipated win from, again, creating better relationships within the team.
It's amazing when you set your customers up for success and deliver what you need. They share it with other people like them who want to buy your stuff. It's so
they bring their
crazy
friends. It's perfect. You throw a nice party, people want to bring their friends.
So I want to ask a follow-on question that's kind of in this idea of sales training. I'm curious about how this handoff actually happens from a customer perspective, right? You're talking to a growth rep and it's like, Connor, I'm not the right person to talk to. Like, how does that conversation happen where it gets handed from a growth rep to an AE? Because I could see that being amazing from a customer's perspective. I could also see that being a ton of friction.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So right now that typically happens. I'll give you kind of the most common use case for us. So our growth reps have a specific, type of plan that they're selling. If customers want things that go above and beyond that plan, it typically requires like an implementation flush out or test. And that's the thing that starts to create time. So our growth reps in that instance will say, hey, I think we've got something that's great for you, but I'm not the right person to show it to you to give you the best experience here. The best person is actually going to be Al on our AE team. So that's how that transition happens. Again, these conversations are usually happening between the two reps in Slack beforehand. That growth rep's going to be able to talk about other customers that Al has worked with that have benefited from seeing his demos and using his sort of approach. So that's how it moves right now. Like at the end of the day, our approach with this is just to do the right thing for the customer. And if our growth rep isn't going to be able to get into the weeds and to get as technical as that prospect is going to need, or doesn't really know the feature set that they need as intimately as someone else, our job is to get them there as quickly as possible. So yeah, that's typically what the handoff looks like. Again, we're going to use Vidyard nearly every time there to create some relationship and create some rapport. Shout out to Vidyard. But that's how we run that right now.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense because that and again, right, it's about what's important for the customer here. So just to reiterate what Connor said there. Hey, Connor, I'm not going to be able to go that deep with you. I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth, and she's the expert. She's going to be able to take you through it. So it's almost from the customer perspective. I feel like it's like, ooh, like you're moving the velvet rope for me,
and I'm going to go into the VIP. Exactly. It's like I come from customer success. So it's like the escalation piece, right? Like if I can't answer your issue, I've got a more technical, more seasoned, more experienced person that can. Let me escalate you. Let me move you up here. Like, yeah, let me peel back the velvet rope for you so you can come on in. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So I think one of the parts that, and this question is kind of in alignment with that, this model has helped close some of those challenges that you have here, kind of sales and customer success. In my past life, it was like, well, that's a doozy. I'm really glad I don't have to deal with that customer, and I hand it off to somebody else, and then it's their headache. We're past that with this model. How has this kind of started to close that gap and drive better alignment between sales and customer success?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say there's probably three things that this has done. The first is that every Friday we get together for a full team sync, and each pod shares their wins and learnings from the week. So that's been a big area for us because, again, if we've onboarded a really tricky customer or we missed something in the sales cycle that really hurt us on the implementation, that's a learning that's getting shared. And it's not just getting shared with your pod, it's getting shared with the group. So that's been one of the big wins for us. We've also rolled out what we call an AE CSM Jam. So that happens on a monthly basis. It's an hour-long meeting where our AEs and CSMs bring the learnings or bring the items that they think that we could all improve on as a group. So, I've had really challenging onboards like this, working with my AE. I think these are questions that we could start asking during the implementation call, or, hey, this feature has been giving us a ton of problems. It's really, really tricky. Here's how we would suggest demoing it to prospects so we create the right expectation on their side. And then the last piece that we've done is we run these regular pod syncs now as well. So these folks are in shared Slack channels. We're piping intercom combos in there. They're having syncs on a regular basis. So it's just created, again, we lost a lot of collisions when we went remote where those conversations would have happened. We're now trying to create some space for those discussions to happen in a few different ways. So that's been it's gotten a ton better. And I guess the last piece is that if you're an account executive and you work with a CSM and you guys are stuck together, you're going to be a lot more inclined to do the right thing more often because that person is not going anywhere. You're matched, right? So
that's an interesting perspective. Can you share a little bit more about the CSMAE Jam? I think that's really interesting. As a recovering sales engineer, one of the things that we used to talk about a lot as sales engineers was what are the technical blockers the customer is running into afterwards? How can we pull that into discovery or get ahead of that objection or set that expectation? But it sounds like you're doing this on kind of a bigger scale. Can you talk a little bit more about what that jam looks like? Because that sounded pretty revolutionary.
For sure, yeah. And one of the nuances here is that there's no managers allowed. It's only the AEs and only the CSMs. Yeah, so we have our senior CSMs and senior AEs run that. But the idea there is that it's a space where people can be honest too, right? Like if you think about it, as an account executive, you might not want to talk about some of the rigmarole or the things that you've tried to get people through the door and why you've done that in front of your manager. But if you're amongst peers and amongst people, it's a lot easier to be vulnerable and to be transparent. So yeah, I guess that was the core of why we wanted to start it, is that we wanted to create a space where CSMs could bring their challenges, AEs could bring their challenges, and without manager oversight and the big brother kind of component that leaders can sometimes bring, let's clear the air and talk about how to make these things better. So that meeting is where our video handoff idea, I think, started. We're essentially doing discovery on our kickoff calls and our customers hate it. What can we do better? It's well, we can do a few things better. One, we can start doing video handoffs that recap kind of the main reasons why this customer bought, build some excitement and rapport there. We also realized that we could start to take fields from our CRM that our AEs were filling out, sort of like those typical Sandler panes, and working those into our kickoff deck so that we can make that process smoother. So that's been the core of it. I want to say on a monthly basis, it's all about bringing learnings that you've had over the last month, challenges that you're currently dealing with. And then again, it's that idea of bringing a bunch of different perspectives in and trying to problem solve on them. And also just knowing that you're not the only CSM dealing with this crap. There's other CSMs that are struggling with things too. That's been a huge win too. Yeah.
That's such a great idea. Everybody should take that. Even if you're not going to the pod model, I think that's a phenomenal idea for revenue leaders out there. Couple questions coming in here. You touched on this a little bit, right? No customer wants to go through discovery 8 times, right? Okay, cool. Oh, hold on. You're handing me off to the AE. Cool. Am I starting from zero again? What are you doing? And do you have anything you can share with the folks here about how, when you're transitioning deals, you're moving them down, or you're sort of wanting them and moving them over to the CSM to make sure that data is not lost?
Yep. It's a great question. So there's a few things that we do. I mean, we use Salesforce, so this is not a product plug or an ad, but we, obviously that should be the place that anyone can go to find out the core kind of critical pieces of info. So one of the things, again, that we're still in the process of figuring out, haven't nailed it at all, is if a deal is going to move down from a CGR to an AE, we are trying to get the growth reps to enter the same type of information that our BDR would enter. So when they're transferring that deal down, it's going to be warmer because we've often gone deeper with them, but the information that they're capturing and transferring to the account executive is the same as what the BDR would capture. So I would say if you use your CRM and you're thoughtful about the type of information that you're putting in there, it's a lot harder for data to get lost. So that's been the biggest piece. And then again, a Proposify plug, like we've got a great integration with Salesforce. So when our CSMs are opening up kickoff decks to, have that first intro call with a customer, we're pulling information from that opportunity, pulling it into a deck, and then the CSMs, will go in and edit and make sure that everything looks good. And then we'll just use, a 30-second confirmation on the call instead of having to run through that in detail. So I would say at the core, it's using the CRM and just being intentional about the fields that you ask reps to enter, because asking someone to enter 100 fields just because is never going to work.
It's not. And as we've talked about a lot, especially in these past couple of weeks on Modern Sales Pros, make sure you're using the information you're having the reps put into CRM. The follow on to that, and I think this is also good too, you ever get a customer that's a little bit grumpy about that? Like, hey, hold on, no, Connor, I like working with you. I don't want to work with Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Or is it, does that happen ever?
We get that honestly more often when we have to transition accounts from one CSM to another. So we've definitely had, it's kind of that double-edged sword of being awesome at your job. Like when you get promoted and you inevitably move into a different role, there's going to be a transition of your account. So we've had some friction there. Again, just being honest with people at what's happening and that they're going to be well taken care of. And, again, using video is a big way to help that. But from the transactional side and the sales side of things, we haven't had anything yet. Again, like our focus with this is how do we get you moved through the sales process as quickly as possible? How do we, make it as frictionless an experience as we can for you? And how do we ultimately get you the right solution? And as long as we anchor hard on that messaging and kind of use that as our justification, it seems to work. Again, we're 90 days into this new model with the full revenue team. So if you talk to me in another 90 days, I might have a different answer. But as of right now, that's how it stands.
We'll have to book the sequel. I mean, it's just there's too much to cover now. So kind of you've talked about Vidyard quite a bit here. Vidyard, great sponsor of Modern Sales Pros. I think we had Tyler Lessard on last week. How are you using that kind of in detail when you're talking about transitioning or onboarding customers? So I think that's interesting, right? This is a real scenario in the wild.
Yeah, exactly. So if we look at like our AE to our CSM transition, that Vidyard is kind of a stitched together piece from the AE and the CSM. What they have been doing is hopping on a shared Zoom call and recording that and then uploading. So that's been one of the ways, but it's essentially like, hey, you've been talking to me. I've been the AE. I work with, Nick all the time. He onboards all of my accounts. He's amazing. We'll also use that video as an opportunity to drop customer references. So a lot of times we have logos that new customers coming in the door will be aware of, they're in the same industry or they're in ancillary industry. So we'll reference that. And then it's also an opportunity for the CSM to look at that, the CSM to look into Salesforce and see what that customer wants and start to speak to a little bit about what's going to happen on the kickoff call. So our video handoffs kind of set the stage for the next call, confirm that we know why you bought, what you should be excited about. We try and build some trust with you saying that, we've worked with customers like you to solve the same problem. And then when we get to that first call, again, it's not the first time the customer is seeing the CSM. We also typically have our account executives jump in for the first 10 minutes of that handoff call to create and kind of close that loop. But that's really the extent of it. It's just putting a face to a name, showing them that we care about them and that we've taken some time to look at their account. And, again, the information that the AE captured during the sales process, it wasn't all for naught. And then when we jump into that call, it's, people kind of know each other and we like to have fun too. Like our culture at Proposify is a pretty fun group. So the team will have fun with those too.
It's a pretty unique way. And I think we hear about that scenario in a vacuum a little bit like, oh, this is something folks could do with video, but it's cool to hear like a practical, real example of how you're doing it. Another question coming in on compensation. What you talked about in this model is that's kind of revolutionary for some folks. You talked about your AE and growth rep. You talked
Yep.
about the BDR. How is it set up for the folks on the post-sales
Post-sales.
side? Your implementation specialists, your CSMs, that's the first part. And then the second one, is there any team or pod incentives that you do? That's coming from me. So first
Okay.
question from the audience, right? How are you designing it for the folks on the CS and the implementation side?
For sure. So our CSMs are comped on net retention. So their variable, they're paid a nice base, and then their variable is going to be obviously a smaller percentage than our AEs and our growth reps, but they're comped on net retention. So, they've got a book of business every month. They have an expansion target and a renewal target, and we scale their comp based on how they do there. That's the only, as it stands today, post-sale role that has any variable comp tied to it. The rest of our support team and our customer success reps are just on stock-based salaries.
Awesome. And now personal MSP moderator question. Are there any incentives that you have on kind of the pod in total?
So I hope none of the team is watching because I'm going to ask this more with them, but we've been playing with the idea because now we're about to roll out revenue targets for all of the pods. So every pod has the same number of revenue producers, quota carriers inside of it. So we've taken a play on the President's Club, and we're calling it Pod of Gold Club. So every month, the pods that exceed their quota by a certain amount, I take them out to dinner. So that's kind of an incentive again for the pods to, it's, all three pods can win. That's going to be a heck of a dinner. But that's one of the ways that we kind of have fun again with the competition piece here. So the pods, again, the idea with that was to try and incentivize them to focus on revenue generation and to also kind of give a nudge towards teamwork. So, we've got people really going above and beyond their job descriptions now to help our account executives bring new customers in. It's been awesome. But that's the Pot of Gold Club, and Melissa Gunn, our director of customer experience, came up with that name. So I think that's the one we're rolling with.
I think that's a great name for it, and it's almost like a mini President's Club where everybody gets rewarded. Because
Exactly.
let's be honest, that's a challenge that you can sometimes face, and you see this come up at the end of the year. Who goes to President's Club? Do the sales engineers go? Do the SDRs go? Well, what about the product people? What about and this is a good solve from a revenue centric perspective.
Exactly.
One other thing that we had touched on, but we didn't dive too deep into, is the idea of professional services and how this kind of created and helped guide what became some of the professional services Proposify offers. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So our professional services are really geared at kind of like taking some of the highest friction activities out of our onboarding and just out of the user experience altogether. So for us, we're, a cloud-based proposal management system. Most of our customers are coming from an offline solution or a different solution to Proposify. And there can be a lot of friction bringing your first document in and getting that spun up. So for us, there were a few different ways that we could look at that. And that's again, where this idea of transactional deals needing a different type of service versus our more complex deals. Our complex deals almost always want what we would call a custom template. So we've got designers, we see 10,000 sales processes, we see tons of documentation, and we know what works. So our larger deals want to essentially pay us out like an agency to build them their website. So that is a project that typically takes 4 to 5 weeks. We take our designers who are, again, building, best in class sales documents for some of the bigger brands in these industries, and we have them build out a service or a template for our customers. The faster moving customers don't need that level of customization. They're almost always, a little leaner. They want to spend a little bit less money. They also want to get ramped a lot faster. So we rolled out what we called like a branded theme for them. So this is a good example. Like historically, we would have had just one service offering. Our branded themes became something that was really attractive. The margins on them were incredible. And we've started selling them like hotcakes. It's funny though, too, because that service is now evolving into not just a template, but a template optimization service as well. So because we have these teams out there working and they're all collaborating, we've really started to find a lot more opportunities for professional services to sort of be thought of and then delivered. And we've got a lot of training services right now that we're testing out in the market. It's one of the things we put to the team every quarter too, is like, listen, we know we have some high friction areas in our user journey. What type of service could we use to move customers through that more quickly or avoid it altogether? And again, that goes back to the team within a team idea with the pods. Is every one of our pods is going to approach that that problem or that challenge a little bit differently. And we've seen it also gives us a lot more ways for services to enter the journey, right? So that's been I guess the way that we've used services. And again, our services are always aimed at taking friction out of the journey, trying to drive deeper adoption, and trying to make Proposify stickier as a product. So that's kind of the thought model that we put behind services when we try and come up with them.
It's really interesting, and I think that also that sales CS Jam seems like a good area for that. Like, oh, there's
Exactly.
friction here.
Yeah.
Does that ever end up when you start to think about professional services removing friction? Does that ever end up productized in some way, shape, or form? Are there points of friction where instead of it going to the pro serve route, it ends up more in product feature?
That's our hope. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the way that we're thinking about it, yeah. And the branded themes are a good example of that. Like that service is evolving now. And we're realizing that if we give better templates away to everyone and they adopt them, like the business impact of that is much more profound than selling them for $1,500 a pop. So it's also kind of helped us open up or unlock some growth channels that I don't think we would have identified previously. So, I mean, yeah, we're in the process now of saying, hey, instead of charging for these, let's give them to everyone. And then let's try and sell the service of optimizing them once they've been, used.
It's an important point on alignment as you reach maturity. And Connor, thank you for sharing that. As you reach maturity with an organization, you reach a certain level of maturity, there's a decision, right? Some's pro serve and it's going to be professional services, and doesn't make sense for it not to be. Yeah. There's other stuff that may bubble out of that is product work.
100%.
And it's a great way to kind of get a feedback loop going with marketing.
Exactly. Yep.
Couple more questions coming in, and folks, keep these coming. We got Connor for about another 15 minutes here, and there's a lot of super interesting topic. One of the questions that came in was around pipeline meetings. How does that work in a pod structure? Is it by pod? Is it AEs and then the growth reps and then the CSMs do the upsell meeting? Like, how does that work at Proposify?
It's a great question. So with the pipeline meetings right now, this is true for coaching and things like that as well. So our pods, if you could kind of stack them, you've got, account executive, CSM, BDR. And if you have 3 of those stacked together, we still manage horizontally through those pods. So pipeline meetings for account executives still happen at the account executive level with our VP of sales. Our pipeline sort of management for our growth reps happen with our director there. And those are still meetings that happen independently, because there's often like very specific coaching and things like that go on in those meetings that don't make a ton of sense for a technical support rep to be in on, right? Their eyes are going to kind of go back in their head if we start talking about lead velocity and deals and things like that. But at the same time, our pods do have bi-weekly syncs where they'll talk about, maybe a really big managed trial that's coming up that's going to need a lot of support and going to need some help. Or a CSM might bring up a really challenging implementation that they're going through right now to see if re-engaging the account executive to kind of resync on why we bought initially would be helpful, things like that. So from a pipeline standpoint, we keep those meetings separate and we keep them very focused because that is a super specific motion to the role. But at the same time, there are more general pod syncs on a bi-weekly basis to talk about things that go a little bit outside of just pipeline.
I think it's interesting when you think about some of that's valuable for the technical support person. Some of it's probably like, I don't cold calling skill or whatever. Maybe
upfront contract. Like, well, I don't know if I need one of those when I get a support ticket. It's kind of tough.
It's a good question. Another one, and I think the team is fully remote today. If you were building this from scratch, though, let's just kind of wave the magic wand. You're building it from scratch. Would you have the pods co-located?
I would look at, so I think if we were going to be a hybrid or in office, I would think there's benefit to having them co-located, because those it's the same challenge, at least that I've had with like strategic meetings and trying to whiteboard and trying to like problem solve. It's a heck of a thing to do over Zoom. And especially if you're trying to have 6 people do it, it can be tough. So so I would say for us, co-located is ideal. If you can't co-locate, then time zone makes it really helpful too. Like we've had to deal with that a little bit, where we have like a night shift for some of our support reps, so they miss out on a little bit of the pod stuff, but try and run the syncs in the afternoon so they can make it. So in an ideal world, same time zone, same location, highest likelihood for a good collaboration. But I think too, as tools get better and as people get better working remotely, that can start to shift.
Yeah, there's still nothing like the whiteboard though. I miss just you pop the marker and you're sketching some stuff and then you're jamming and on that.
Exactly.
It's tough to replace that. A couple other questions on, and these are more kind of came in during registration, but I know are top of mind for some folks. If you were thinking about sort of getting alignment that this is the right structure for your organization, this is a big change for a lot of companies. What type of selling did you do as the revenue leader, kind of up and across to your peers and then up to the rest of the executive team to say, hey, this is non-traditional, but we're going to give it a shot? Like, how did you sell the idea on this?
That's a great question. So I think I started small. So I started with some of like the things that hurt both teams when I'm and talk about both. I'm talking about sales and CS. So I started there. So it was like, listen, let's try pair, we're not doing a great job with handoffs. Some of our professional services are lagging because people didn't necessarily fully understand what they had bought. Let's clean that up by pairing people together and seeing if that consistency creates any benefit here. So I started with a lot of experiments, again, with the end goal that we wanted to move everyone into a pod. So what were the things or the signals that would make the other leaders in the company comfortable with that type of change? So that's where we started. It also kind of at the core of all this was putting the customer first. So I had the idea in my head that if we took a more consultative approach to selling, we were going to be more successful. And again, that experiment that we ran at the start of this year really proved that out for us. So it was a lot of sort of, I would say, passive pressure, which was more, hey, let's run some experiments and see if people working more closely together and starting to pair up benefits us. Oh, you're already doing that with BDRs and AEs. Well, let's see if that might work for our CSMs and our AEs. And then on our side of things with the customer team, we were able to kind of, I guess, I've been gardening a lot. So we were ready to seed the lawn because we had already paired up our support reps with our CSMs. So that pairing was in place. We said, hey, if we paired our AEs and our CSMs up, or we made some more, I guess, if that got a little bit more consistent, would we see benefits there? And then the pods started to really take shape organically because the CSMs really liked working with a single AE. The AEs found it to be a little bit easier to hand things off because they knew what the CSM was expecting. And then when we ran that revenue experiment at the start of the year with a support rep and they closed as much as an AE, we said, okay, there's something here. That was the nugget that I took to the powers that be, I would say, to say, listen, I think there's an opportunity here for us to bring the entire team together with this model. We've seen a ton of success with our CSMs and support agents. I mean, we had a 125% net retention last year in the SMB space. That's a very atypical number. So that kind of coupled with all of the other loose experiments that we did kind of gave me the confidence to say, hey, I think this is going to work. And then at the same time, we're going fully remote. And I think this is a fantastic way to create more alignment, to get people connected better, create more collisions. And I mean, so far we're 3 months in a row exceeding quota, and that's never happened before. So the results have really, at least so far, knock on wood, kind of justified it. But again, like I said, we're learning as we go, but that's kind of how I approached it, was running experiments with my contemporaries to see if there's stuff there, running experiments with my team to make sure that those relationships would hold and be valuable. And then once we had enough results early on in the year, we kind of brought that to leadership and said, hey, I think this is where we should go.
It's such an interesting concept. A couple more questions more around the organizational design and in capacity modeling.
Yep.
Is it 1-to-1-to-1-to-1 in each one of the pods, like one AE,
Yep.
one CSM, one SDR? So does this change how you think about staffing, right? Because there's some, CSM is sometimes 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. Does it change any of how you model what needs to be in a pod?
That's one of the things that we're looking at now. Like, that's one of the questions that we want to try and answer over the next 90 days is like, how should we approach growing these pods? Right. At least initially we said, we'll just spin out a new pod every time we need to add X amount in ARR to the business based on the forecast. But again, with this model, we're starting to test some test some limits that have been in place for a long time. Like, does the quota for our account executives, can it increase? Can we ask them to close more by putting less of their time into every deal and bringing other resources to those deals to fill the time that they're not there. We're starting to see some things like, yeah, we might be able to, I mean, we've had AEs on pace to hit double what they're currently at. So
That's a
from
good
that,
problem for the
oh,
AEs.
perfect problem. Yeah, they're stoked about it. So yeah, we're learning a lot there. We're also, I mean, it's introduced a new wrinkle into our forecasting because our transactional reps with that like 6.5-day sales cycle, they can churn through leads like crazy. So it's one of the things that I'm excited for this year when we forecast for next is working with our marketing and our product team. We've got a free plan. We've got a ton of inbound organic traffic. What do we think we can do with these growth reps versus, how are we going to approach the AEP? So it's been, we've learned a lot. I think for capacity modeling, especially for revenue, it's allowed us to think a little bit bigger and maybe think that our limits are a little more flexible than we initially thought.
It's an interesting idea, right? You usually hear about quota and quota attainment going the other way. The quotas are too high, but this is an example of that. And that's also a great recruiting tool. Like AEs who are getting paid a ton are really happy to tell all of their friends.
Exactly.
One follow-on question to this is we think about capacity. This also, I could see a question about this being, sounds expensive. Sounds like there's a lot of people meeting, a lot of people handing off. Has this changed how you think about kind of the economics of the revenue organization?
For sure. I mean, the way that I think about it is that it's a little bit cleaner for me to understand. I mean, the cost of customer acquisition, people talk a ton about that. I hear a lot less about the cost of retention. So this has really helped us understand both of those a lot more cleanly. And I think as well, I mean, at least when I'm looking at our account executives, if they're used to investing 6 hours of their time into every deal, if we can put a more cost-effective person into the cycle and take a few of those hours back to put on another deal, I honestly think we've got a chance to make it cheaper under this model. And then the other piece that's again hard to quantify is that our hypothesis with this is that it's going to reduce turnover. I mean, sales team and turnover, it's a common thing that people struggle with. Our hope with this is that we have way less turnover now because we've got a lot more relationships to keep people inside of the company than just being on this island as a closer and you're kind of out there by yourself.
Well, and I think probably last question that we're going to get to, does this change how you think about career paths for people? How has that evolved with the idea of the revenue pod?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we think about that pod graphic, if you come into Proposify as like a level 1 customer success rep, you have way more paths now that you're able to go down. And those paths can take you 4, 5, 6 years. So for us, it's made hiring a lot easier. I mean, I think probably 10 out of the last 15 positions we've hired for have been internal referrals. So this kind of like team focus has also, it's done a lot for retention. I think the folks that come into our co-ops love it because they come in, they're working on a pod, they get to see what 6 different roles look like inside of a company. And then we're also a huge believer in maybe right person, wrong seat. So that's also afforded us some flexibility there as well. But yeah, career path wise, we have a lot more paths now for every individual. There's a lot more steps that they're able to go through and kind of climb up the ladder. And yeah, all in all, the feedback from the team has been really, really strong there too.
Really, really interesting. We covered a lot, and Conor, we're almost at time. We hit on a whole bunch of different things, kind of pulling it back to the first principle of alignment and this pod structure. What's one key takeaway that you want folks to go home with here?
I would say that bringing a team approach to your business can really be of benefit. I mean, I had 3 takeaways that I was trying to just tie into one, but I mean, I think with the pod model, like at least for me, experimentation right now is super important. The world around us is changing really, really fast. And if your company is of any size, we're not a massive company, but we've got over 100 people now, and you kind of lose that agile magic that small startups have. This is a way to bring that back into your team. So I would say that if your company has a challenge that they need, to iterate on and be agile to solve, or if you feel like you're getting caught by other businesses in your space, this is a really fun way to get your team re-energized guys. It's a great way to create a lot of relationships in your, within your org that might not exist today, especially with the remote world. And for me, it's been a massive driver for more experiments. We've generated new revenue channels from it. We've created new roles from this as well. So I would say it's a great way to like reinvigorate your sales org and also kind of get experimentation rolling within your company if you're struggling to do that.
I think there's a lot here, and I want to talk about that CS, the cost of retention. There's a bunch of different topics here that we can explore next time we get together and talk. But with that, Conor, I know you're super busy. Thanks for taking some time today to share how things are set up at Proposify and share a little bit more about this product model. Very interesting stuff. On behalf of Elizabeth and the team behind the scenes, everyone who joined live today, and everybody watching out on YouTube in the future, thank you so much. And thank you again for the sponsorship.
Beautiful. Yeah, we are stoked to be here. So this is a blast.
Excellent, Conor. Well, be safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. You too. Cheers.
Take care.